over 1,300 games, over 75 million units sold, and of course, 6 different models, all with their own quirks. This is the Nintendo 3DS, first released in 2011 and now in 2020 at the end of its retail life. It's a stunning system loved by many. I know that. In fact, I love this thing. I've even done a buying guide on it already. Of course, that buying guide, done with my buddies the Golden Bolt and Token Geek, is from 2018. It's now 2020, and my thoughts on the 3DS line of systems has changed a bit. Thus, today on Stuff We Play, let's examine the 3DS's hardware, software, and accessories to answer the age-old question, should you buy a Nintendo 3DS in 2020? This video was sponsored by Foxic Adventure. Foxic Adventure is an awesome new 3D puzzle platformer style game now available on the Apple App Store. Take control of Patrick the Fox as you go through 7 different locales featuring a plethora of unique mechanics. The game is available in a variety of languages and is free to play. Best of all, for a mobile game, none of the main adventure is locked behind a paywall. So what are you waiting for? Follow the link in the description or pinned comment below, or boot up the App Store on your iDevice of choice and check out Foxic Adventure today. And now with that, let's dive into the 3DS's hardware. The 3DS is most definitely not impressive hardware by today's standards, and it wasn't even impressive by the standards of when it released in 2011. Remember, this thing came out around the same time as the PS Vita, which, you know, could actually play games in HD. Of course, I'm not going to go over the 3DS's E3 announcement and development and stuff here, as I've already talked about that in other videos. In fact, if you're expecting this to be a beat-for-beat update of my 2018 guide, you'll be disappointed. In the 2018 guide, we decided that the 3DS was a cheaper option than the Nintendo Switch and had a bigger library, and thus would be a better console option for those on a budget. But in 2020, the 3DS is pretty much dead, and the Switch has seen a couple new hardware revisions and a ton of new titles. As such, instead of doing a dedicated 3DS versus Switch section, I'll be weaving in comparisons between the two throughout this video. I'm doing this mainly because I feel like the majority of those who are watching this buying guide will be deciding between those two consoles. As for this section in particular, I'm focusing on deciding which of the 3DS models is the best, both in regards to hardware and the most bang for your buck. So let's go over the 3DS's multiple different versions. There were 6 different hardware revisions of the 3DS. These models are the original 3DS, which launched in March 2011, the 3DS XL, a bigger screen 3DS which launched in July 2012, the 2DS, which was non-foldable, lacked 3D capabilities, was a good bit cheaper, and launched in October 2013, the new 3DS and new 3DS XL, which had slightly upgraded internal hardware, improved 3D features over the original 3DS, and added thumb nub and extra shoulder buttons, and also removable faceplates for the smaller model, and both of which launched in February 2015, and the new 2DS XL, which launched in July 2017, kept all of the upgrades of the new 3DS XL, dropped the 3D functionality again, and also added some minor quality of life upgrades, such as a cartridge slot cover. I'm lucky enough to have 4 of these 6 models to showcase today. That's all of them except the new 3DS models. The footage of the new 3DS XL was graciously provided by my fiance, and as for the smaller new 3DS, well, I mean, faceplates are cool, but not cool enough for me to hunt this thing down. As can be seen from the 3DS's name, this line of consoles was originally sold in its glasses-free 3D features. Basically, when in 3D mode, the effect caused by the 3DS is less of game stuff coming out of the system towards you, but rather of the upper screen gaining a bit of depth. Think of like looking into a box. It's a really cool feature when used well, but most games that made a point of incorporating this feature did not use it well. As such, I ultimately never used it much. I think this was common with a lot of folks actually, hence why the 2DS consoles exist. The first model of the 3DS released in 2011, and it is definitely my least favorite of all the models. And that's not to say it's a bad console either. It's definitely not. But I feel like every model that came after this one improved on it. It kind of reminds me of the original model of the Nintendo DS with its weird bulky accents. Also, those membrane style start, select, and home buttons are quirky in the not so cool way. But also, it's really comfortable to hold, and like all 3DS consoles, it's backwards compatible with DS games. That was particularly important at launch, as the 3DS had a rather rocky first year. It was $250 at launch, and there weren't a lot of great titles available for most of that first year. I mean, yeah, the 3D was a cool gimmick, and I definitely felt like I had something cutting edge after trading most of my DS stuff for one of these things, but within a few weeks it dawned on me that I was just using this thing to play DS games, and the occasional round of a very rough port of Street Fighter 4. Nintendo quickly caught on that this was the vibe around this thing though. A few months after launch, they slashed the price to $180 and gave a bunch of NES and GBA games along with a virtual certificate to those of us who bought the 3DS at launch. You can tell that this one right here is from launch, as I still have my virtual ambassador certificate on it, along with the aforementioned free virtual console games. I know a lot of people may complain about Nintendo just rewarding those of us who got the system at launch with old games from old systems, but really, Nintendo didn't have to do anything for those of us who dropped the $250 dues at launch. And it's thanks to their 3DS Ambassador gift games that I was finally able to play the likes of Metroid Fusion. Overall, it was a cool experience, but not enough to make this a must-have model of the system. To organize my thoughts in this section, I've created a tier list of the 3DS models. This list ranks them on both overall user experience and best bang for your buck. You're welcome to let me know what your favorite models are and what your 3DS model tier list is like in the comments below. Anyways, I'd put the original 3DS on the bottom of the list in a category I fittingly called Launch Model. It's not bad, but the original model 3DS is just that. A basic 3DS with no major bells and whistles, and also a few quirks due to being the first of the bunch. Now, next up on the 3DS timeline is the 3DS XL. This thing is basically just a 3DS, but bigger. Though, that's not fully giving it enough credit. Along with bigger screens, this one also has a slightly more ergonomic design and start, select, and home buttons that don't feel like something from an old calculator. The only issue I've had with mine is that, after years of use, mine now occasionally resets itself if it gets jostled too hard. But I'm not sure if that's a 3DS XL problem, or just a I played this thing a lot in high school and should have been more careful with it thing. So it's something that I'll note here, but I won't let it affect its tier list ranking. Of note with this particular 3DS XL is that's actually a special edition console. This is the Mario & Luigi Dream Team Special Edition 3DS XL, and both comes with the game pre-installed onto it, along with a really cool silver and gold pattern on the shell. Though I think Dream Team is a pretty subpar RPG, it's still a beautiful console and one I'm glad to own. But this is one of just many 3DS Special Editions out there. It's also one of 3 on display in this video. Along with this console, I also need to note my Pokeball Edition New 2DS XL, which has a pressable Pokeball button on the top, and the Galaxy Edition New 3DS XL that my fiance uses. That one is my favorite of all the 3DS Special Editions for 2 reasons. First off, it's a gorgeous system, and was also a Special Edition console announced by Reggie himself. Secondly though, I used this particular console, along with a Cheesecake and Animal Crossing, to propose to my fiance last year. But back on topic. Though the original 3DS XL is good stuff, its hardware is still pretty much the same as that in the original 3DS. As such, some later titles such as Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon may display a good bit of slowdown when played on it, and that will definitely affect its ranking. I'm putting in a tier simply labeled, it gets the job done. It's better than the original, but it's definitely not the best you can do. Now we get to the 2DS, a model that definitely looks and feels cheaper than all other 3DS models. Instead of the iconic DS-like clamshell design, this thing basically looks like a multicolored cheese wedge. But it was cheap at launch, and it's dirt cheap nowadays. Back in 2018, I said that this was perhaps the best console option out there for Nintendo fans on a budget, but that's changed a bit in 2020, though I'll get to that in a bit. As far as price goes, the standard 2DS is incredibly inexpensive nowadays, can still be found new in box on occasion. Those new systems, when I see them, are usually around $70 here in Canada, and they also usually come with Yokai Watch or Mario Kart 7 pre-installed. Of course, if you find one used, then we're talking sub $50 on average for a great little gaming machine. This is especially awesome as Nintendo Switch consoles are in high demand and are selling out all around me right now. Though the 2DS is still based off of that original 3DS hardware, feels like a budget console, and tracks dust like nothing else, the price factor makes the 2DS a really solid game system, especially for those on a tight budget or just looking for a console for kids. I'd even say it's the best console on the market for those with kids right now, if it weren't for the fact that the Switch Lite is basically a cheaper, more kid-proofed version of the Nintendo Switch. As such, the Switch Lite keeps the 2DS from being top tier as it was in 2018, but it at least allows it to rise to the second highest tier. Fittingly enough, that's a tier I'm calling really good tier. From there, we get to the new 3DS consoles. Yes, that's what they're actually called. These were pretty much the 3DS's equivalent to the PS4 Pro. They added RAM and new buttons and also extra 3D capabilities. Of the two, the XL model was definitely the fan favorite. Nintendo of America probably saw this coming, and that's why the smaller N3DS only got released in North America in smaller quantities, while the new 3DS XL remained in production and readily available until 2019. The new 3DS consoles, along with the following new 2DS XL, also had their own exclusive games that could only run on new 3DS hardware. And if we're talking about physical releases, there is a whole whopping 4 of those. These new 3DS exclusive titles were Fire Emblem Warriors, Minecraft New 3DS Edition, Runbow Pocket, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3D. All of those play fine on the new 3DS, with Xenoblade being my personal favorite. But also, now with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, all 4 of them have seen better releases on the Switch. Seriously, as much as I love Xenoblade, I'd much rather use a proper joystick for camera control instead of this weird little thumb nub. The main upgrade you'll get with a new 3DS over an older model is just performance boosts in regular games. The bigger screens on the XL along with the performance boost would potentially make that my favorite model of the system, were it not for one major design flaw. See, the new 3DS models also had the cartridge slot moved from the back of the console to the front of the console, and in doing this move, Nintendo decided against adding a cartridge slot cover. As such, it's possible to accidentally bump the cartridge slot just right while playing and eject your game. And that's annoying. And you know what else is annoying? The fact that these systems didn't even come with a charger when bought new. Still, those things are not deal breakers, and if you absolutely must have a 3DS that has 3D capabilities, then this is the best one out there. Plus, if you're shopping used, you can find these things for around $80 on average nowadays, which is why the price factor isn't such a big deal for the 2DS anymore. But there's still room for improvement with this model, and it doesn't feel as kid-proof as the 2DS. As such, the new 3DS XL is joining the 2DS in the really good category. And as for the standard new 3DS, the removable faceplates were cool and remind me of the Game Boy Micro, but also like the Game Boy Micro, there are better options out there. So this one can just join the standard 3DS XL in the gets the job done category. Now, we get to the final officially released model of the 3DS. The new 2DS XL gets rid of the 3D features again, adds a cover to the cartridge slot, and also gets some subtle aesthetic changes that make it easily the most gorgeous console Nintendo has ever released. The new 2DS XL released shortly after the Switch, and it was kind of Nintendo's way of saying, hey, the 3DS isn't dead! Well, not yet anyways. And I get it. It was a stopgap of sorts until they were ready to announce the Switch Lite so that they could still have a budget system on the market. That said, the 2DS XL itself does not feel cheap or like a budget system. In fact, it feels incredibly well built. This console looks and feels like a modern piece of tech. It's by far my favorite model of the 3DS, and if you're just wanting a recommendation on a 3DS to get, it's the one I'd recommend getting in 2020. Besides, units are cheap nowadays, ranging around the same price as a used new 3DS XL if you find one used, though if you must, you can still buy these brand new. As such, I have the perfect spot in my tier list for this system. It's a tier at the very, very top, and it's fittingly titled the best model. But there is one other weird seventh thing to consider. That, of course, is emulation. Now, if you go this route, know that it is dubiously legal and it is legally recommended that you own any game you emulate. Also know that, depending on the hardware you're using for emulation, your results will vary. The most popular 3DS emulator is called Citra, and along with being available on PCs, it has also recently received a port to Android. I haven't given that a try though, but I have heard good things about it. But as the 3DS is still relatively newer hardware, know that for many folks, real hardware will still provide a better experience than emulation. As I haven't tried this out myself and know that results may range, but I still found it important enough to mention here, I'm placing the Citra emulator in a space on the tier list labeled, "Your mileage may vary." That's good and all, but where does my thoughts on 3DS software sit in 2020? After all, I think the new 2DS XL is the best model of the 3DS, and though less powerful, I think that the 3DS has more broad appeal than its main competitor, the PS Vita. Though I do quite love the Vita. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive into the next segment. Here's the thing about the 3DS. A lot of the great titles for the system are either ports of other games or have seen ports to the Switch in recent years. For example, a lot of folks love to talk about the excellent Zelda remakes, Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D. But, though excellent, those are still just remakes of N64 games that have already been re-released on other consoles. There's other examples of this as well. Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D is awesome, but it's still just a port of a Wii game, and also not as good as Tropical Freeze, which is available on the Switch now. Luigi's Mansion 2 on 3DS was kind of and it doesn't hold a candle to Luigi's Mansion 3 on the Switch. And also, how about Resident Evil Revelations? Now on Switch. Azure Striker Gunvolt, now on Switch. Hyrule Warriors, better on both Wii U and Switch. I think it says a lot that the last first-party Nintendo game for the 3DS was Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. You know, a port of a Wii game. But that's not to say that all the games on the 3DS were either ports of old games or ported to other systems. Far from it. I talked at length on the Pokémon games in my earlier buying guide, and I still think that the 3DS is a better way to experience that series than the Switch, as you can experience versions of 7 different Pokémon generations on this system. Plus, there are a slew of great other exclusive RPGs for the system. Bravely Default and Shin Megami Tensei 4 come to mind here. And actually, if we're talking about the last ever physical release for the 3DS, that was Persona Q2, a game that looks awesome and that I have also been unable to find anywhere. Though, that wasn't the last ever 3DS game in general. In March 2020, the excellent indie platformer Miles and Kilo got a port to the 3DS, and though I think that title is also best played on the Switch, it's affordable and fun and a definite must-own for any 3DS owner. But I'm not wanting to focus just on ports of games here. I mean, let's be real, the Switch is just as much of a port machine as the 3DS was, though the games I mentioned earlier all look and play better on that system. Anyways, I want to briefly go over 5 games that, as of the end of May 2020, are still 3DS exclusive. For good measure too, these are also all games published by Nintendo themselves. The first of these is my absolute favorite game for the system, Kirby Planet Robobot. Kirby games are usually rather simple and easy affairs that involve you playing as the titular pink puffball as you run, jump, and fly your way through stages, all the while devouring all the enemies in your path and stealing their powers. Planet Robobot mixes the formula up a bit by giving Kirby a giant mech suit that he can use. This game is so solid, so fun, and such an absolute joy to play, and the mech suit adds enough that the game feels unique and fun, all the while still feeling like a Kirby game. It's fun and very easy to recommend. Next up is Hey Pikmin, a game that got a lot of flack at launch because when people heard a new Pikmin game was coming out, they were hoping it'd be a Pikmin 4 on Switch and not a spin-off on 3DS. Basically, this game takes the RTS-esque Pikmin gameplay from the main games and shoves it into a 2D platformer format. And actually it works surprisingly well. It's certainly not the best game ever or anything, but it's a game that's dirt cheap whenever I come across it, and it's actually a lot of fun. Definitely check this one out if you're craving something a little different. The next game we're covering is actually a Pokémon spin-off, or more accurately, 2 Pokémon spin-offs. These are Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity and Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon. I'm just showing Gates to Infinity right here as it's the only one I have the case for, but know that both of these are solid Pokémon themed dungeon crawlers that are a ton of fun. Both of these actually got quite a bit of flack as well at launch, especially Gates to Infinity, and while I can understand much of the criticism, I think they're fun games that are well worth giving a shot. It's cool stuff. The next title here is a launch title, and it's also the game with the least amount of content out of these 5. This, of course, is Pilot Wings Resort. This title is less so a traditional Pilot Wings game, and is more so just the island flyover minigame from Wii Sports Resort, fleshed out into a full release. And, as that was my favorite part of WSR, I am totally down for that. It's a great game to pick up if you want a relaxing title on the cheap. The final one of these games is a Zelda game, and it's actually my favorite part of the Zelda series. That's The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. This is a sequel to The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, and it pretty much looks and plays like an updated version of that. But thanks to a tool buying system and a wall running mechanic, it also manages to stand out on its own. If you're a fan of overhead adventure games, then this one is a must buy, and it's easily one of the best games on the 3DS. As mentioned, while the 3DS has a great library, a lot of its great titles have seen ports and releases on other systems. Yet, the 3DS does manage to do a few things better than the Switch software-wise. It has a sleek UI that can be customized with themes, and it even has easily movable game icons, something that was also present on the Wii U. It's just a more pleasant user experience than the Switch. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Switch menus are super simple to navigate and figure out and stuff, but perhaps they're too simple. Also, the 3DS has a proper virtual console, and it's easily the best way to play Pokémon Crystal version nowadays. Anyways, before we move on to my final thoughts, I'd also like to highlight some neat and weird accessories that came out for the 3DS. So with that, let's go into the last section. There are 5 3DS accessories that I would like to cover today. They're all pretty unique and definitely worth mentioning, but they're also not exactly things that justify buying a 3DS. The first of these is the Circle Pad Pro. This was an optional secondary Circle Pad joystick thing that came in a cradle that you just plopped your original model 3DS into. It's pretty cool, but it was also made obsolete by the inclusion of the thumb nub with the new 3DS consoles. However, there is something to be said for having an actual second circle pad for camera control in games, instead of something that feels like a mouse from a mid-90s laptop. The next of these is the NFC Reader Writer. With the release of the new 3DS systems, NFC support was added as part of the 3DS's hardware, and as such, amiibo figures and cards could be used with 3DS games. But if you were using an older 3DS or 2DS, then you'd be out of luck unless you got one of these NFC Reader Writers. Nowadays, these aren't really necessary since new 2DS XLs are so cheap and have built-in NFC support, but it's still a unique piece of weird tech that's worth mentioning. Now, I want to briefly mention the Wappy Dog. This was a robot dog produced by Sega Toys I mentioned in a previous video, and it was a dog made to interact with a standard DS game. But in Japan, there was actually a pink Wappy dog made for the 3DS, and it was even compatible with its own 3DS app. This is probably a good time to mention though, that the 3DS was the last Nintendo console to have region locking. So if you want to get a Robo-Pooch of your own, you're best off just getting the DS version instead of importing a Japanese 3DS. Now, I know I dogged on the small version of the new 3DS earlier, but those faceplates were pretty cool. And some of them even had their own special functions. The absolute neatest of these is the Plate & Watch, a Game & Watch style faceplate that also works as a digital clock. I mean, sure, the 3DS already has built-in clock functionality on the home screen, but this faceplate is a type of weird and retro-styled thing that I just love to see. The final 3DS accessory I'd like to mention is also the most frustrating of them. That, of course, is the 3DS capture card, something that I unfortunately don't own. There are a variety of 3DS capture cards out there, but unless you want to engage in modding shenanigans, you have to spend quite a bit of money to have one installed on your system. Nintendo never officially released a way for people to play 3DS games on their TV, despite the Wii U seeming like it was made with that in mind and even having DS Virtual Console games. Anyways, as the 3DS is on its way out, all the major makers of 3DS capture cards seem to have stopped production. As such, if you want to record gameplay from a 3DS system, then either reconsider or get ready to plunk down hundreds of dollars on eBay. Really, if you're an aspiring YouTuber or streamer and are debating between getting a 3DS or a Switch, then stop watching right now and just go with the Switch. But what about everyone else? In conclusion, do I think you should buy a 3DS in 2020? Well, it all depends on where you fall in one of three categories. I'll call one of these Avid, the next Casual, and the last Budget. Avid is for those who want to buy a system that's the big thing right now, something that will have continued support for years to come and that has the best game selection out there. And if that describes you, then get a standard Switch. And if you ever feel an itch to play some Kirby Planet Robobot or Pokémon Sun, then maybe at that point, get a new 2DS XL. Of course, keep in mind, I only recommend that you do that if you feel sufficiently unsatisfied solely by games on the Switch. Casual describes those who want a console perhaps for their commute, or as a Christmas present for a kid, or even just as something they can pull out on a rainy day and keep in storage the rest of the time. For this, I would recommend the Switch Lite. It can play all standard Switch games, and to me, feels both a bit higher quality and a bit more kid-proof than even the 2DS. I feel like this is also the best option for the majority of gamers on a budget as well, as a new Switch Lite and some good games off the eShop can be had for around $220 USD. But if you're on a gaming budget of under $100 and want some Nintendo goodness, then you fall into the budget category here. And if that fits you, then you should absolutely get a new 2DS XL. Keep in mind though, I'm not approaching this video as a collector or as a tech enthusiast today. I'm just trying to approach this for the most part from a more practical perspective. And practically speaking, for $100 USD, you can likely get a new 2DS XL and a few great games off of eBay. The new 2DS XL is the king of the budget consoles, even in 2020, but the release of the Nintendo Switch Lite in 2019 has given gamers on a slightly higher budget an option to experience the best that the Switch has to offer. And that's great because at this point the Switch is Nintendo's future. But the 2DS XL is still cheaper, and though there are no more major releases planned for it, it is a wonderful system. Even if you don't buy a 3DS though, I'm hoping that this guide helped show you just how awesome this little system is. After all, even if I think most people are better off just buying a Switch nowadays, the Nintendo 3DS is still worth fondly remembering. So with that, that's it for this 3DS buying guide. I don't think it's as much of a must-buy as it was in 2018, but it's still a really cool system. But do you think you should buy a 3DS in 2020 if you own one? What do you think about my thoughts on the system? Let me know in the comment section below. Please keep it civil though. If you can't be civil, you will be shadow banned. But anyways, I'd like to give a huge, massive thank you to some of my awesome patrons and YouTube channel members. Those folks are Justin Chipman, The Golden Bolt, Dylan Ola, Robert and Abby Hornerbrook, Robert and Abby Hornerbrook. They're great folks, by the way. They sent me a PC Engine CD. G to Next Level, List, and Eli Cole. Their support means the world, especially right now. I'd also like to give another huge shout to our sponsor. Foxic Adventure is great. Definitely check it out. So, thank you very much for watching. Stay classy, and I'll see you next time.